Throughput.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Vance, also known as Ricky Vance, and a great episode for you today. Not just a great episode for you today, but an important episode for you today. Dr. Brian Hooker, Ph.D. scientist, is with me today. He is the focus, his story is the focus of the Vax documentary, which has to do with this CDC whistleblower, Dr. William Thompson, and a cover-up and scientific fraud. We talk about all that and more. Please share the show. People need to see all sides of the argument. This isn't an anti-vax show. This isn't an anti-vax story. It's all about getting people the information and let people decide for themselves where they stand. But they need to hear all sides of the story and perspectives because the science isn't settled. Please listen to this podcast. Share it. I do have a Patreon page if you can support the show. Please do. Like I always tell you guys, the more support financially I get, the more likely I can focus on just doing the show and put out more episodes and do this full time. But if you can't support the show financially, and I also have shirts if you want to purchase one, if you can't buy a shirt or support the show financially, please share the show, tweet the show. We have to fight back against censorship. It gets harder and harder to get these conversations out there and the alternative perspectives out there. So please do that. I'll keep this intro short because it's such an important podcast, but I'm on Parler, RV36, Twitter, RV36, Instagram, RV36, YouTube, RV36, or you can just search the Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm also on Facebook. You can look up the Ripple Effect Podcast page. You can like it there. Subscribe to us anywhere you can get podcasts. Rate the show, review the show, do all those good things. And also, if you want to connect with me personally, Ricky Varandas, or look up Ricardo Varandas, and we can connect directly on Facebook. And a lot of people have, and I truly appreciate it. And this is a very hot topic, something that I think is very important, probably more important now than ever because of all the stuff that's going on in the world in regards to pushing vaccines and the coronavirus vaccine discussion and all that other stuff. So please share the show. And I think that's it. Enjoy the show, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks. Peace.
I like your setup.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's a basement. I used to play music, and that's kind of how I transitioned into podcasting because I'm like, I already have the equipment. Might as well put it to some use. So once I stopped playing music, well, at least stop doing it too often. I'm like, you know what? Might as well do something useful. And it was a little bit more rewarding too, playing or doing the podcast compared to playing music, because music, it's like you got to write a song, you got to put it all together, you got to record it. And it's like with podcasting, it's I could just record a conversation and put it out within 24 hours and really have some impact or do something, you know, in regards to provoking thought and hopefully helping people look at things from different perspectives.
Well, I really like the title of your show, The Ripple Effect. You know, that is what, you know, in terms of my research in vaccine safety, what I've really been trying to do is to, you know, throw that stone into the pond and see the ripple move out further and further and further. And that's exactly what's been happening. So, you know, it's a real, I'm privileged to do your show. It's nice to be able to meet you, and I've seen some of you know, I think you've interviewed some of my colleagues in the past as well. So
yeah, I think Brian Festa, also Del Bigtree.
Nice. Del, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I've been pretty deep into this whole vaccine issue for a long time. I've been one of the, much like yourself, somebody who the desire to have to discuss this topic and have to share information and help people critically think for themselves and actually see all the perspectives of the debate. That desire is much stronger than my other desire of trying to avoid confrontation because it is a confrontational topic. It's hard to talk about it without pissing somebody off or getting in a heated exchange.
Yeah, it's really different. I'm not very confrontational by nature. I tend to be pretty amiable and agreeable, and don't necessarily, like direct confrontation. But I mean, the issue is it is what it is. And I think that when you're looking at this particular issue, the reaction of the other side is almost outwardly hostile. And so I've come to grow pretty much a thick skin regarding some of the online persecution. I mean, I'm loath to like Google my name, and see what pops up, because there is a really, really strong force that, if you start to question vaccine safety, then, you stir up a lot of dust, and there are a lot of powers that be that do not like us doing this particular work. I'm fortunate. I work at a university that's very supportive, not necessarily of my position, but of my academic freedom, my freedom to be able to do this type of research and also speak out, because I am the parent of a child with a vaccine injury. And so, I've been in some ways a little insular, but again, all I have to do is Google my name and there it is.
Yeah.
So.
Well, one of the hottest topics in the alternative media community, anybody who's doing anything in regards to having a discussion that's going against the grain or going against the mainstream narrative, is censorship. And a lot of people like myself and yourself, who's been in kind of this vaccine debate, you much more than me. I've been a lot of times pushing people to your work and work of many others that I'm a fan of. But one thing that we've seen, we've almost could foresee this coming, because the censorship for the vaccine debate was one of the strongest examples of censorship. I mean, you literally could not find the other side of the debate. Like, you couldn't, if you want to do your own research, it almost became virtually impossible to see anything that went against the mainstream narrative, correct?
You couldn't be more correct. The latest that I've seen is that Del Bigtree's show High Wire is no longer on Facebook. I believe it was taken down from YouTube. I'm not exactly sure about that one, but it was really shocking. The level of censorship that was going on, even in my own when I recently published the Vax versus Unvax study with Neil Miller, and it came out in May, at the end of May, and within 2 or 3 days, depending on how the paper was posted on Facebook, it was fact-checked, and it was determined by the fact-checkers to be quote-unquote unsupported. And so when my good friends and colleagues at Children's Health Defense, which is the organization that includes Robert F. Kennedy Jr., when they would post my work, then it would come back with a fact check. The fact check on Facebook completely obliterates, my work. It completely, if they put a link up to the work, it completely obliterates it, and you actually have to click on another link in order to remove that veil, so to speak. And it basically just says that it's false. This is peer-reviewed scientific literature. I went through 18 months of peer review before this particular paper was published. The journal that ultimately published the paper peer reviewed it 4 times, 4 different rounds of peer review. It went through the grist mill. It was the review was so rigorous, and I appreciated the rigor. I wanted, basically my work to be tested by fire to make sure that it was completely lock solid, and that as much as could be possible that it was retraction proof as well. And so then, in a matter of days after the paper come out, for Facebook to start fact checking it was really, really a blatant example of censorship, not based on, even scientific content. I'm a big free speech advocate. But the thing that was so insurmountable here was this is science. This is science that is indexed on the National Library of Medicine site, PubMed. I mean, it went through the scientific peer review process, and yet it's still being fact checked.
Yeah, and Ben Swan's had problems with it. I think the Plandemic documentary, one
Right.
thing that, regardless what people think about Dr. Judy or all the information in the documentary, the concerning thing to everybody is the fact that somebody has decided it was too dangerous for us to watch. Just people giving their opinions and telling their life stories and telling you their perspectives and their personal experiences, like that we're not knowledgeable enough to look at that information and decide for ourselves. They're deciding what truth is, and their version of truth is the only thing that we can digest and we can be exposed to, and everything else is going to be, I mean, it literally is, everybody's talking about fascism and communism and dictatorship. I mean, what the fuck are we turning into? We're turning into that when the government has decided that what truth is and what information we can or cannot see. And this is a huge issue. Zach Voorhees, who is a Google
Right.
whistleblower, he's been on my show too, and he talked about how it was quite obvious that the terms are being blacklisted and the stuff that they were suppressing. I mean, so many people, you just go to Google something and then go to DuckDuckGo. Why? Speaking of Google, my phone just turned on because it's always listening. But you go to DuckDuckGo, it's one of those things where, like, why am I getting extreme examples? And even DuckDuckGo is getting worse, but it's getting so hard to just get access to the information. And that's all we're asking. We're asking, you know what? Go, let people see all sides of the debate. Let them decide for themselves. Don't tell me the pandemic has been debunked 24 hours after it's went viral. Like, how can there already be so many debunked articles? Why is Dr. Judy's Wikipedia locked? And why is the first line, even if you asked your phone, like who she is, it would read the first part of the Wikipedia page, which says she's an anti-vaxxer conspiracy theorist. And it's just like, you're already molding people's perspective before they get access to the information. And anytime they push that hard on something and suppress it that much, then people should ask questions. And Ben Swan said when he was on my show, like, he thinks that they overplayed their card, because let's be honest, like, when your story came out, and when I was talking about, I remember when the first time I had the big tree on with Polly, when the Vax documentary first came out, it was one of those topics that a lot of people were still very much against anybody who's questioning it or whatnot. But now they've kind of screwed themselves, where a lot of people are second guessing vaccines and really getting much more skeptical about the science. But now they've gone to other methods of, like, well, let's just supercharge our censorship on any other perspective, where you can't watch a documentary questioning vaccines. You can't listen to an interview. I mean, I was just interviewed before I had you on somebody else's show, and I was telling them, I'm like, I wanted to hear an old Brian Hooker interview, and I couldn't find it online. I'm like, I couldn't. I Googled it. I'm like, where the hell is that interview that he did with? I'm like, I'm pretty sure I remember seeing him being interviewed by this guest or that host or whatever on this show, and I couldn't find it. I'm like, why is that going on? And so, what is so dangerous that you can't even get the other side of the information? And that's the argument I always make. It's like, let people get all the information, and if they still decide to vaccinate their kids, then that's okay. As a parent, you have to get all the information, and then you have to do what you think is best. But when you're not giving them all the information and you're force feeding them one piece of information, then you have pediatricians making you feel guilty about not vaccinating your kid. You have pediatricians telling you that all the science is settled, and I'm going on a long rant, and you're the one who should be talking.
No worries.
But as you can tell, it's a passionate topic for all of us.
Speaking truth.
Yeah.
You're speaking truth, and you said something very important. They've overplayed their hand. They really have. And you look at public opinion around, this poorly tested, rushed out to the market COVID-19 vaccine in whatever way, shape, or form it's going to take. The public is very, very wary about that, and they, it's almost like the powers that be and the censors underestimate the knowledge and the amount of information and the intelligence of the public. And I see more individuals coming to me personally, medical practitioners who are afraid to say their name on public, but who are contacting me offline saying, hey, what do I do about this? And the word is still getting out. despite the sensors, despite the atom shifts of the world that are in cahoots with people like Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates and the individuals at Google and so forth. They have extended their hand, and more people are waking up. And you see a backlash of that as well. It seems like the more people that are waking up, then the more that the sensors are trying to tighten down on the information. And I'm heartened. I'm glad that like Children's Health Defense is involved in a lawsuit against Facebook right now, and a lot of their content outside of my particular paper, a lot of their content is is heavily censored by Facebook, heavily censored by Google. And you get this little disclaimer whenever you look at Children's Health Defense that says, well, for the most up-to-date information on vaccine safety, go to cdc.gov. I've been investigating the CDC for nearly 20 years now. That is not the place. That if you want biased policy, and if you want information that is basically population control and based on behavioral theory and not based on vaccine safety science, go to the CDC. Fine. But the other side, which is very, very scientific, which they don't like to debate us because we do have our scientific ducks in a row, is that part is not making it out. And so the challenge becomes, how do we continue to get our information out? Yeah, we can press in the courts. That costs a lot of money, though. I mean, I'm glad that there are entities like Children's Health Defense that are able to press into the courts. But, Joe Public, you and me, we don't have the type of money to take Facebook to court. We can't do that. So we keep pressing away. We keep looking for things like DuckDuckGo, which I think, it's almost like whack-a-mole. Okay, they whacked us in Facebook, or Google, so we go to DuckDuckGo. They're going to whack us over there. So where do we move next? So it becomes very, very difficult. And I would love to, I save everything that I have. I save my interviews on my hard drive. So because I know those things are disappearing and they're going to continue to disappear.
Well, your story is one of the most important stories in this whole debate and this whole controversy and this, what ended up being a cover up. To me, it's without a doubt one of the most important stories because it happened. It was a blatant cover up. Right. It was proven. You have recorded tapes. You have documents. It's so let's get, for people listening who might not be familiar with your story, let's go to the beginning of it because I am known for going on long rants and getting the interview off track, which I did. But for people who might not be familiar with your story, how did you get involved in all this? Because I think what people will be surprised. I think these backstories are important. Same thing with
Sure.
Robert Kennedy Jr. Because it's like everybody just thinks he woke up and he was this guy who was criticizing vaccines. It's like, no, most of us didn't want to get involved in this. We just were so passionate about it when you realize that there's censorship and you realize that there's information out there that parents need to hear and know about. And I think that's what motivates a lot of us. But please to share your story and how you got involved in this.
Sure. Well, my son was born in 1998, and I was very, very pro-vaccine, and I was not skeptical. I didn't even really know what vaccine injury was. And, I want to say that as clearly and honestly as possible. I didn't even know it existed. I knew that there was some type of theoretical risk. I'd never met somebody that had sustained a vaccine injury or had a child who sustained a vaccine injury. And neither did I have any impetus to really look for that type of information. So my wife was much more vaccine hesitant than I was. And so my son received his vaccinations on schedule from 2 weeks old. He didn't receive the hepatitis B at birth then because they were just transitioning to that recommendation. So he received his hepatitis B, which was loaded with mercury, at 2 weeks old. And he continued to be vaccinated. And as he was vaccinated, he became a very sick kid. Recurring ear infections, sniffles, tracking slow on his development, but okay. And we continued to vaccinate until he was 15 months old, and he received 3 vaccines that day in his well baby checkup while he had an active ear infection. And I remember the nurse practitioner telling us, we questioned it and we said, well, he's kind of sick. We have a doctor, we have an appointment with a specialist the same day because of his recurring ear infections. And she's like, oh, it's not a problem. He's not really that sick. We do this all the time. And that was really his toxic tipping point. He fevered. He had a low grade that then progressed into a very, very high fever. And then after that particular point in time, we did the things that parents did at the time, which was treating the fever with Tylenol, which is absolutely the worst thing we could have done. And then he very rapidly lost any type of language that he had, any type of joint attention, any eye contact, and he received his first diagnosis of autism 3 months later from the same practitioner in a well baby checkup at 18 months, and was enrolled in a special preschool not too long after that. And then we came upon an integrative physician that said, no more vaccines, no vaccines, no vaccines, no vaccines. And we saw his mercury load, from the thimerosal, the mercury-containing preservative that was in the vaccines. We did hair mercury analysis. We did urine and fecal mercury analysis. He was loaded. And we were actively trying to get it out at that particular point in time. Mercury was just the beginning. Looking at just the beginning. There's a lot of issues with the vaccination schedule. There were a lot of people that thought, oh, if we can just get mercury out of vaccines, everything will be fine. That's just not the case. It's not true. We're introducing toxic soup into our very, very most vulnerable, youngest of our population. 21 vaccines following the United States CDC schedule by their first birthday. And so I became very, very skeptical. And by 2001, I was started investigating the CDC, starting making phone calls to CDC scientists like William Thompson, Frank DiStefano, another gentleman by the name of David Shea. And the CDC did not like my phone calls. They did not like the fact that I was challenging them. I was able to get some of the information from their ongoing studies regarding mercury-containing vaccines in autism and the MMR vaccine in autism. They did not like what I was saying. They would not like the statistical errors that I was pointing out. I have a Ph.D. in biochemical engineering, and I know statistics, and I knew what they were doing was, for lack of a better term, duplicitous. It was wrong, and it looked like a cover-up even at the very, very beginning. In 2004, CDC cut off all conversations with me. They said, look, the excuse was I was participating in a national vaccine injury compensation program. We were trying to get compensation for my son's injuries, and they said, oh well, if we give you information, it's you can use that in discovery in your son's vaccine court case. So in essence, you're suing the CDC. So they sent me a cease and desist letter. It was really super dramatic, and I gave it to my attorney. My attorney laughed and said, this is bogus. You can contact any government agency at any point in time. There's nothing that precludes you from contacting CDC scientists. And so we wrote a letter back, and the CDC said, yes, you're right, but we just won't respond to your phone calls. So all I had to do, my only recourse was to submit Freedom of Information Act requests. Started to do that. I got really, really good at it. I'm kind of obsessive compulsive. You can submit one a month. And so every month, I'm almost at a streak. I think there were a few months that I might have missed, like 2009, 2010. But every month since then, I've submitted at least one FOIA request to the CDC and continue to get information. To go a little bit further, then in 2013, out of the blue, I received a call from one William Thompson. I didn't even realize he had my phone number. But then, we started this phone email dialogue where he started to disclose the fraud directly. And he showed the fraud not only regarding mercury-containing vaccines, but also, more importantly, some direct fraud regarding the MMR vaccine, the timing of the MMR vaccine and autism. And so we had, over a period of about 9 months, we probably talked on the phone over 40 times. He exchanged, thousands of pages of documents. We were emailing each other every day, and he was exchanging documents showing that CDC was seeing a relationship between vaccines and autism, and they hid it. And they destroyed data. They violated the Federal Records Act of 1950, which says that you retain these records. They saw specifically an effect between the timing of the MMR vaccine and African American children. I extended the analysis to African American boys. They never looked at boys versus girls. I looked at boys, but they saw that African American children were at least twice as likely to receive an autism diagnosis if they got the MMR vaccine on time versus those children that got the vaccine much, much later in life stage, like after 3 years of age. And they were not about to publish this information. So they, one Saturday, they got a bunch of recycle dumpsters and they trash canned all the information that was associated with that particular effect. So Thompson revealed all this information to me. We went public on it very cautiously and very gingerly. I developed a friendship with Dr. Thompson over that period of time, and I didn't want to see him get hurt. I felt like what he was doing was very brave. And so we started to roll out the information starting in August of 2014. And since then, this was featured in the movie Vaxxed. I was working actually behind the scenes when we brought the whistleblower forward. I was working with Andy Wakefield. He's much more of an expert regarding the MMR vaccine and autism than I was. And so Andy was involved in that. And then ultimately that led to the film Vaxxed, which was produced by Andy Wakefield, Del Bigtree, and Polly Tommy. And all this information has now been made public. You can get all the emails. I recorded 4 phone calls that I had, 4 long phone conversations with Dr. Thompson, and you can get the transcripts, both the audio transcripts as well as the written recordings. All that information is now made public. Yet CDC acknowledged fraud? No, they have not acknowledged it. They did an investigation into my allegations of fraud, into Dr. Thompson's allegations of fraud. They released the results in late 2018 and said that it all came down to a scientific disagreement, that no fraud was committed. The co-authors of the one study that Thompson was talking about all denied that they ever destroyed records. And so it was Thompson's word against their word, and the CDC declared no fraud. The DeStefano paper, the MMR paper that was the most blatant example of fraud, is still in the public domain. It should have been retracted. It was never retracted, and it's been cited by other articles over 91 times, and it's still the CDC's policy that there is no relationship between any vaccine or any vaccine component and autism.
So Dr. William Thompson, he didn't have copies of anything, right? So when they destroyed everything, he didn't have some secret stash of anything or copied anything? It was
oddly enough, he retained it all. He retained it all.
Physical copies, or you mean mentally he remembered it?
Electronic copies.
Oh, he did. Okay.
He did retain electronic copies of the information. And so I have the original data runs. I have all the data tables that show statistically significant relationships with the MMR timing and autism in African American children, and also what we call regressive autism. They saw that if a child was developing normally and then regressed into autism, there was a very, very strong signal. Those kids that were regressing were getting the MMR on time much more frequently than those kids that didn't regress into autism, that were just neurotypical kids. So I have all that data, and all of that is available still.
Okay, yeah, that's why I was asking, because I'm pretty sure that data was available, but then you said they trashed everything, so I was curious on what they trashed. But he obviously had his version of it. So, Dr. William Thompson, since this all happened, what has he done any interviews? Has he talked to anybody? What? So he was obviously on board in regards to putting this information out there, because I know I think I've heard you say it, or maybe it was during one of your phone calls with him, how he felt guilty knowing that this information was being suppressed to the public, and every time he saw an autistic child, or he felt more guilty about it.
Right.
You're obviously, you were close with him. I'm assuming you probably still are. Maybe how does he feel about all this? What's his opinion on? Is there a reason why he's not doing interviews? Is it because of obviously all the public pressure, possibly losing his job, harassment? Where does he stand on this topic now?
Well, oddly enough, in September 2014, he cut off all communications with me. And it was very difficult. To this day, if I shoot him an email or something, he will email me back and say, I can't talk, or nothing. He wouldn't. I tried to text him once. He returned my text and said, please don't text me. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on with that. I do know that that there's been information and opinions that have been sneaked out by others in the community that have been in contact with Dr. Thompson. I'm not aware of what direct conversations he's had with different individuals that are involved in our movement, but things have been snuck out. And so this is the only inference that I have. This is the only information that I have in terms of, whether he's going to retire from the CDC. I mean, I've heard rumblings. Oh, yes, he's going to retire from the CDC. And I knew that, when I talked to him, he was waiting until he had 20 years service in the CDC. So as a government employee, he would be vested in his retirement, and then he was going to retire. Well, that was 2017, and he's still in the CDC. And so, at this point, I don't know what to think. I've heard rumblings that he's still very supportive of our position. But it's all, unfortunately, it's just a big mystery. It's all conjecture. There was an attempt to get Dr. Thompson to testify in a federal lawsuit. The CDC blocked it, and the CDC director at the time, Thomas Frieden, said no, you couldn't testify in federal court. We tried to get him subpoenaed by Congress. We could never find a congressman. A lot, because there's just so much pharma lobbying money in Congress. We could never find a congressman who had the authority. They'd have to be like a committee chair in order to subpoena him and get him in front of an open committee. Nobody would do it. We went through oversight and government reform. I went through 3 different committee members working with them, or committee chairs working with them, giving them the information. None of them never got any action, never got any traction, and it has never been subpoenaed by Congress. So, there's a lot of closed doors in this particular regard. I don't know what to think. I feel a bit betrayed, by somebody who was a friend of mine, and so it's all a black box. There were rumblings that he tried to debunk. I had a study that was published in 2014 in a journal called Translational Neurodegeneration, and I showed, I reanalyzed the CDC's data, and I reanalyzed it the way that Thompson told me to reanalyze it. The paper stood for 2 months, and then once the whistleblower story broke, then the paper was suddenly retracted. However, I did republish all of that information in a different journal in 2018. Okay, so all of that information stands, but I do know that at one point in time, Dr. Thompson was trying to debunk. He was trying to retract his own admission, and he was trying to debunk my results. in saying that it wasn't really an African American effect. It was more due to socioeconomic factors. However, those reasons that his efforts failed. He was not able to get rid of that sort of African American signal that showed that those that were getting the MMR on time were more likely to get an autism diagnosis. So it's really, it's a mystery. It's dissatisfying. It's here. We're like 6 years later. It's been almost exactly 6 years from when we took the story public in 2014.
Yeah, and it seems like his heart is in the right place, or he wouldn't have spoke to you and given you so much information in the first
Correct.
place. So I think he's a sincere person who obviously did something good in regards to getting some real evidence and some real dialogue in this topic. But we also have to take in consideration the amount of influence that big pharma has and the money and power that CDC has. I mean, it's it can ruin somebody's life. I mean, you see it over and over again how they do such a great job of just character assassination, making people look like lunatics, ruining people's careers. So, I mean, I guess if he did some good in regards to helping you get this information out there, and then he gets threatened and for fear of his life or God knows what, maybe doesn't want to, I guess, talk anymore. I can understand that.
Yes.
I can see how that. We're talking about some of the most influential people and powerful people out there. I mean, big pharma. I've said this over and over again. When I was growing up and I was learning history and learning about geopolitics, it was always the military-industrial complex. The military, that was the biggest threat, right? It's like, oh my God, they're so powerful, they can talk us into wars just for profit and for resources and whatnot. And now big pharma has become the biggest threat because big pharma has way more influence on our politicians, on our media. I mean, you see it during the pill epidemic. During the pill epidemic, when young people were dying left and right, nobody during the debate brought it up. Why? Because those commercials during those between those segments of those debates, what did you see on those commercials? Pharmaceutical drugs. That means they were paying the salary of the people interviewing the TV channel, a lot of those politicians, and it wasn't even a topic, even though it was a huge deal and it was affecting so many of our lives. I went to multiple funerals in 1 year of young people dying under around the age of 30 or younger, and it wasn't even a hot topic on the debates. It wasn't even something that was brought up. So it is. I mean, people have to understand how powerful big pharma is, and when you have that much resources, that many resources, and that much money, you can control the media, you can control the narrative, you can character assassinate people. You saw what happened with the documentary, right? I mean, the documentary was called an anti-vax documentary when it was really just about a CDC whistleblower story. It was about your story. It was about Dr. William Thompson's story. It wasn't a anti-vax documentary. It might have exposed some information that people who are anti-vax can use for to justify their position, but that wasn't the focus. It was about telling this one specific story, which I think was really important. And if anything, like, just let people get that information and decide. But Del Bigtree said himself, I mean, and I don't know how you feel about it. Do you think that all the negative press actually helped it played in your favor?
I do. Once censorship is done, then it really sort of piques everybody's curiosity. As like, well, why is this so bad? Why should I not be watching this? I mean, it's not it's not pornography. It's not it's not violence. It's it's somehow it really helped in the fact that the movie was going to be originally in Tribeca, in the Tribeca Film Festival, and then was withdrawn unceremoniously and by Robert De Niro, who later on said, yeah, you should watch this movie. Even though it was withdrawn from Tribeca, it was more to protect the Tribeca Film Festival. It wasn't, Robert De Niro's personal opinion against Vaxxed. He later was, I think he was on Good Morning America and said, yeah, everybody should watch this movie.
Yeah,
And
but did you
so,
see how he was grilled during that interview? I don't know if it was Good Morning America or the Today Show, which one I watched, but it was obvious that they had somebody who was telling them push back, make him look like a
right,
lunatic. And if you watch that interview, they were so polite to him the first time he was on, like prior to that interview. And then when he was kind of promoting or saying everybody should watch it, that there could be something there that people should be open minded to, all of a sudden they were like they pigeonholed him. I mean, they were treating him the way they treat Andrew Wakefield or Del Bigtree or Robert Kennedy Jr. like he was some
right.
conspiracy theorist, which was crazy.
Right. And I think there was sort of this realization, looking at De Niro as a figure, and sort of the to me, I don't know, I come from my own background and have my own biases, but it made the other side look really, really stupid. Because there was just an element of desperation of like, oh, we have to debunk him. We can't, we can't have people see this movie. And again, all it does is pique the curiosity of those individuals to see the movie. And people came out in droves. I was, fortunate to, I was at the premiere of Vaxxed at the Angelica Theater. And of course, Angelica picked it up very, very quickly and wanted to release it before even the Tribeca Film Festival because there was such a furor. When all the press hit, Angelica said, no, we need to do this now. We need to hit on this now because everybody's talking about Vax, the movie that they don't want you to see. And so it did, there was a real outcry, and a lot of people ended up hearing about that movie that would have otherwise hear about that movie. And when I was participating in the Q&As, I just did a few. I didn't do a whole lot of them. I wasn't like Andy and Del and Polly who were touring across the country, but it was always to a packed house. Always, there was very rarely did you see a bunch of open seats. And it was quite the phenomenon. So I'm thankful for Tribeca. It was a lot of free press, but still the level of censorship and again the way that they treated Robert De Niro, I think that was on the Today Show, is just an example of the desperation of that pharmaceutical industrial complex to as soon as somebody falls out of lockstep, with that pharmaceutical narrative, then they're branded anti-vaxxer, they're branded, kook or conspiracy theorist or whatever. All you have to do is go to my Wikipedia page and you'll read all the same stuff about me.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. It's like people can't make a informed decision if they don't have access to information. And they're force feeding you one narrative. They're calling everybody a conspiracy theorist. And I think in a lot of cases, this COVID-19 thing's helped with the vaccine debate because there's a lot of people that were apparently okay with vaccinating their kids, but now when they're talking about fast tracking a vaccine for them, they're like, oh wait, well let's reevaluate this. It's like, wait, you're okay with pumping whatever the hell the pharmaceutical companies want into your bloodstream, I mean your kid's bloodstream, but now that it's a time for your turn, all of a sudden you're questioning it. It's like that's not fair. You should be questioning it the whole time. And so I think it has helped a little bit. You look at the pandemic documentary, it was going viral. People suppress it, but I definitely think that maybe it being suppressed did help make it like the forbidden fruit. Like you tell your kid not to touch something, the first thing they're going to do is touch it when you leave the room. I think that there is a little bit of that. But I also am afraid of just people who are honestly curious, who just can't get access to information. You just can't. If you want to do your own research, it's becoming impossible. I just had Dr. Scott Jensen on yesterday, and I have you on, and I was just thinking to myself, I'm like, I wonder what's going to happen when I post these on YouTube. I'm already like shadow banned for the most part. It's like I'll be very surprised what happens. I mean, luckily, podcasts, the RSS feeds that we use it's where people can get these the audio version of these shows anywhere on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, wherever it may be. It seems like we have a little bit more freedom there. It's much harder to censor us there. So thank God that podcasts, people listen to them, and we don't just depend on YouTube. Because you'd have to censor us on iTunes, Spotify, all those places, which they've done though. They all came together to to censor Alex Jones, and regardless what people think of him, it's, you know, like London Real Brian Rose said to David Icke, I don't have to, I forget how he worded it, but he's like, I don't have to agree with everything you say to agree that you have the right to say it and defend your right to say it. And I think that's the problem, is that people should have the right to state their opinions. I mean, you're a PhD, you understand science, you understand data, you're looking at it. Your opinion should not be suppressed. Your opinion, you know, should be something that people should have access to and listen to. And in the typical world, I mean, in any other topic besides vaccines or things that revolve around big pharma, you know, this whole COVID-19 thing, getting a second opinion from a scientist or from a doctor, and two scientists or two doctors who disagree is quite normal and acceptable. But these topics, it's not.
No, it's not acceptable, and we have lots of individuals with an experience. One of the things that I was really really impressed by Vax 2, the second movie that came out that was produced by Toby, Tommy, and Brian Burrows, was that there were many people that had a story and had an experience. And you know, it's that information that I also, you know, I have you know, alphabet soup behind my name, fine, whatever, but we have people that have valid experience, that and seeing that information suppressed as well, and seeing them discounted, as you know, you've got people who are grieving the loss of their children, you know, babies that died because of a vaccine injury. And then all of a sudden, those people are being, you know, shadow banned and censored just for speaking out and telling their story. Their story matters. Their story is, you know, it's very personal. It's a very deep emotional thing that they're sharing, not, you know, not for any particular gain, but they want to make sure that what happened to their child doesn't happen to yours, and seeing that banned as well is really disheartening. It is, you know, it's crazy to see the level of censorship. You know, we always keep a lot of copies of Vaxxed and Vax 2 on hand and on DVD, just because we know that, you know, when we talk to somebody, we can't say, oh, you can stream this online or whatever. We just don't have that guarantee anymore.
Yeah, and the thing is too, like one argument out here from the other side that used to really make me upset was the whole like, oh, it wasn't the vaccine. They didn't realize that their kid was having some type of autistic symptoms or some neurological issues prior to that. And it's like, as a parent, anybody who's been a parent, like if you're a good parent and you spend time with your kids, maybe if you're a bad parent, you don't spend any time with your kids, you might not pick up on it. But if you're a decent parent, you spend some time with your kids, every little progress they make, you notice. Everything that, you know, every new word, every new reaction, every new question, everything that they do, you pick up on and you get excited about, and you're constantly analyzing your kid to see how cognitively they're progressing. So to think that like parents just didn't pick up on it and it wasn't the vaccine is crazy to me, that people think that that's a logical debate, you know. And Del Bigtree said it on I don't know if it was his show or my show or somewhere. He does a lot of shows, so it's hard to know where he said this, but he talked about how the hardest thing to do as a parent, and you know firsthand, and Brian Festa and Don, who also from CT Freedom Alliance, you know, and Paulie and everybody else who's had some injury because of a vaccine, that one of the hardest things to come to terms with is that it could have been possibly avoided. So the fact that they think that like parents are using it as a scapegoat or making it up, like it's ridiculous. Like I'm sure it's probably the last thing you want to believe.
No, I would want to have not lived through this experience. I mean, not a day goes by that I don't regret the decision that I made to vaccinate my child that resulted into a vaccine injury. So you have these parents in despair, and yet we're called everything. Every name in the book is given to us. The parents are the best experts. They are hands down. If somebody tells you that you're not the best expert in your own child that you spend 24/7 with, spit in their eye. That is absolutely not the truth. The parents are the best experts, and practitioners are now being trained to second guess the parents because of the pharmaceutical industrial complex narrative that, oh no, it couldn't be the vaccines, couldn't be the vaccines. I had a practitioner tell me, a very pro-vaccine practitioner tell me, oh well, parents are the best. They jump to conclusions over coincidences. These are coincidences, and they're the best monitors of coincidences, and use that as a way to dismiss wholesale anybody that would see a cause and effect relationship. I'm a scientist. All I do in my life is look for cause and effect relationships. And when you see something that is so blatant, that is just so easy to pick up on, vaccination one day, developmental disability follows very, very quickly, high fever, screaming, rashes, ear infections, so forth. The parents are the best experts, and as they have this report, and we have thousands and thousands of reports, even thousands of videos that they did on the Vax bus that led to the Vax 2 documentary, then they're being discounted wholesale, and in any way, shape, or form that they can be maligned, they're being maligned. They've blamed autism on psychotic parents. They've blamed autism on parents who use drugs during pregnancy, or drank during pregnancy. Fat moms, fat dads, everything. Anything that they can do to blame the autism epidemic on something other than vaccines, they will do it.
Yeah, I second spitting in their eye. The only problem is most of those people are probably going to be wearing face shields because they're the same people who are freaking out. So it'll be safe to spit in their eye. But it is one of these things where it just like it is a very hard conversation to have. People get very emotional about it because it is their kids, and they don't want to believe that maybe they made a poor decision. I've had friends of mine come to me and listen to podcasts I've done with Dell or others on this topic, and they're like, oh, I feel so bad vaccinating my kids. And I always tell them the same thing, like, don't feel bad, because we can only make decisions based on the information we have. And then you're going to make the best decision you think, for your child based on that information. Who you should be upset at is not yourself. You should be upset at the people who suppress all the information and suppress all sides of the debate. Those are people you should be upset about, because it's not fair for you to have to make your decisions based on big pharma just pushing these vaccines from the pediatricians. I mean, pediatricians, the first couple of years of a kid's life, I mean, you take away vaccines, they don't have a whole lot of work. They don't have much else to do, So believe me, I remember seeing this stand-up comedian who he was an opener for at a show, and he was a pediatrician, a full-time pediatrician, and he joked about it. He's like, yeah, he's like, stop, being so anti-vax people. I'm like, if they stop giving vaccines to kids, I'll be out of a job. And I'm like, he's joking, but it's true. Like, it really is. Like, it's a huge part of, I'm sure, profit. There's a profit motive, I'm sure.
Correct.
There's another thing you talked about is we're talking about vaccine injured children. What people also don't understand is how many parents have kids who have a adverse reaction to a vaccine and never report it. So even if you look at this, I know personally parents and people who had given their kid a vaccine, soon after had some allergic reaction or some type of adverse reaction or got sick or whatever, and that never gets reported. They call them, oh, no, it'll go away. This is kind of normal. Or if it gets worse, call us or whatever. And that's it. And it's like, so all this whole idea of, I mean, when people say that, oh, yeah, vaccines are safe and effective, it makes me so upset, because it's like, based on what science? What are you even talking about? Like, there is a vaccine court. There are people who get money. There are plenty of parents who have vaccine injured children, and there's plenty of parents who probably have some adverse reaction to vaccines. Their kids have adverse reaction that we never ever hear about.
Correct. All you have to do, Google
or DuckDuckGo.
Or DuckDuckGo. Okay, good. Thank you. But yeah, this is still up on Google. It's called the Lazarus Report. The Lazarus Report, and just Google Lazarus Report and vaccination, and it will bring up a report that was done. It was funded by the CDC, where what they found was that the vaccine injury rate was more like 1 in 39. So for every 39 needle sticks, one person was having a vaccine adverse event. I would give you the hyperlink, but it's really long involved. It's easier just to type in those particular keywords, Lazarus report vaccination, and yet the CDC worked to suppress that report. And when those individuals reported that information back to the CDC, this was an established HMO, an HMO called Harvard Pilgrim, and it was Harvard Pilgrim's own clinics that where they established what the actual vaccine injury rate was. Again, 1 in 39, 1 in 40, not 1 in a million. And when the CDC found out, they cut off all communication. They basically said, look, we're not going to fund your grant. We're not going to answer your phone calls. We don't want this information to be disseminated. And so, this was an opportunity that they could automate their own databases that report vaccine injuries and bring them up to date. CDC chose not to do that. They would rather go with the 1 in a million, which is a big fat lie.
Yeah, and so for people listening, I mean, the CDC website, the inserts on these vaccines, they themselves don't say they're 100% safe and effective. They give you the side effects. They tell you, it could cause this or that or this or that. I mean, how much of this was new information to you? Like you said, you weren't really into the whole vaccine topic until after you had your issue with your child. So how much was just surprising to you? What was in a vaccine after doing your research?
It was all surprising. Every single bit of it was surprising. I grew up in a family where my mother was a public health nurse, and she was in charge of distributing vaccines and coordinating vaccination clinics for one of the largest counties in Southern California. And so, I thought, I remember getting vaccinated as a child. I just got a very few of them. Okay, it wasn't anything like the CDC schedule, nowadays. And it wasn't even a small fraction of what the CDC schedule was. So I had no reason to doubt at that particular point in my mind. I just didn't know. And my wife and I were trying to be model patients. We wanted our doctors to like us, so we would somehow get better service. But we, for all intents and purposes, we had drunk the 1998 Kool-Aid. And so that is, and then, so the shock of finding out how wrong I was. I mean, it was literally psychological trauma to be so wrong about that particular issue. I mean, it was, I remember coming to the realization of what had happened, and just, one day looking at the mercury levels in my son's hair, urine, and feces, and seeing them come off the charts because we were starting to get it out, and seeing that my son's hair was a toxic waste because the mercury levels were so high. And I just remember, crumpling down the floor, just sinking down on the floor in the bathroom and just sobbing because I was so absolutely wrong.
So what is thimerosal is, some people might have heard the term. It's a mercury preservative. It eventually, thanks to, I think, Robert Kennedy Jr., got removed from some vaccines. Is it completely out of all vaccines? Is it still exists in some vaccines?
It's not completely out of all vaccines. It's in the flu shot. It's in a lot of the flu shots that are being distributed in the United States, and they're distributed in what are called multi-dose vials. When you have a multi-dose vials, you can actually withdraw 10 different flu shots from the same vial. And so they have to use a preservative, and this preservative is mercury, which is absolutely nonsense. Why would you put mercury into a body? But what is more difficult and more heinous than what they were doing to my son when he was, 2 weeks, 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, 15 months old, what they're doing now is they're giving that flu shot to pregnant women. And those pregnant women are getting exposed to 25 micrograms of mercury that partitions more selectively into the developing fetus than it does They've done studies with placentas in animals, and it shows that it partitions the mercury toxifies the developing fetus. And so, if anything, I'm thankful I'm thankful my wife didn't get a flu shot they weren't giving flu shots during pregnancy then in 1998. So, to say thimerosal is no longer a problem because it phased it out of childhood vaccines, nothing could be further from the truth.
So the child can still be affected by it by getting when the mother gets the flu shot, obviously.
Right. And then the child can also get the mercury in the flu shot is now recommended at 6 months of age, at 7 months of age. And then
in Massachusetts, they just did you hear about this? I'm sure
Yes.
you have I live in Massachusetts. So as you can probably guess, I'm super upset about the fact that luckily we're homeschooling our kid until all this shit's over, both our kids. And because my kids aren't wearing masks, they're not going to have a flu shot. They're not having it. I mean, they're completely unvaccinated. Thank God that, but it shows the power of pediatricians. I tell this story because I think a lot of people go through this. I had so many people on my show. I had discussions about it. I showed my wife documentaries. She very much respects my judgment and my ability to kind of analyze information and research, and was all on board. And after appointment and appointment and appointment of going to the pediatrician and then putting pressure on us and then putting the seed of doubt in her and scaring her, there was a few times that she came home and she's like, do you think we're fucking up? Do you think we're messing up by not vaccinating our kids? And I could see that. I'm like, you're letting the pediatrician get to you. I'm like, don't doubt all the information you read. Don't doubt all those parents, those stories you heard, all those stories of parents that wish they had your position to be able to say no before it's too late. And
right.
So, I'm like, don't take that for granted. And luckily, but we never vaccinated our kids, but it just showed how the pressure of that they put on you. I mean, we end up having to move pediatricians because I would do the whole, we're going to wait. We don't know if we're going to vaccinate. We're going to wait kind of type thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of the wink, wink, nod, like, okay, they're done. But they just kept harassing us every time we went in. Got to the point where my wife wouldn't go to the appointment. She begged me to go to the appointments. I would have to, take time off to go to them because I'm just better at dealing with confrontation. Even though I didn't like it, I was better at dealing with confrontation when they pressured us. And she would say I'm better of remembering stuff. So she wasn't very. She would panic and then not know how to respond.
Right.
But why should anybody have to deal with that? Why should anybody have to deal with that? And when these pediatricians, and I don't blame all these pediatricians because they're, again, just like the average person, they're only as good as the information they have, and they're getting force-fed one piece of the argument also, and they're being told. So I think their heart could be in the right place. Some of them, some of them could have their heart in the right place. They're just misguided.
Yeah, to say that every pediatrician is evil, every pediatrician is pushing a vaccination is evil is absolutely incorrect. They're getting one-sided information, and they're being conditioned. We're not really learning, and we're not gaining knowledge and wisdom as a society. We're gaining conditioning as a society, and there's so much that's going on, in the airwaves, in the mandates, with COVID-19, with all these governors that are suddenly acting like dictators, and telling us, oh, it's for your safety, it's for your protection, it's for your health. A lot of the same mantras that were used in Nazi Germany we're hearing now. And it's not, the thing that is really difficult for me as an educator, as a university educator, is that everything that society is doing right now is to condition individuals to not think and to make them, suspicious of anybody that falls out of that particular party line. And we just need to think. We need to be able to have the ability to think on our own, to not be censored, to have free discussions, to utter the words like, oh, I'm questioning vaccine safety without having the world, take a double take at you, would be really, really wonderful. And, I'm so impressed by you and your wife for raising that question and for voting with your feet. If you've got a practitioner that is pressuring you to vaccinate, vote with your feet.
Yeah, no, they actually kicked us out. We got a letter in a mail saying that we need, but I was okay with that because honestly, I'm like, we need to find somebody who, we don't have to go through this type of harassment every time we go to the pediatrician. You're
much better without him.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then I also wrote them a bad review online. And this is a perfect example of how my wife's like, or should you, I'll tell you what really pissed me off was the fact that I'm a very much like you. I try to avoid confrontation. I don't like confrontation. We have a little family-owned construction company. One of my least favorite parts is getting in heated arguments with people and,
Hmm. Hmm.
about, some job or whatever. And, but I was trying to avoid the confrontation, and then she kept, instead of just like, no, we're gonna wait this and that. I could tell that she either wanted to get us vaccinated or she wanted us to leave the pediatrician's office, and she kept pushing and pushing, and then we ended up getting in an argument, and then argument, and I got mad at her. I'm like, listen, why are you arguing? I'm like, my son's here. At the time he was 4 or whatever
Right,
was,
right.
and I'm like, and we're arguing in front of him. I'm like, my wife and I don't argue in front of him at home, and you think it's okay for you to spark an argument? If you really care about him, I'm like, you're trying to traumatize him by giving him some argument. I'm like, you're supposed to be this respectful person in a white outfit, that you're a doctor or a pediatrician that we're supposed to respect or whatever. And now he's confused because his dad's arguing with the person who's supposed to look after his health. I'm like, and I got pretty upset. And then I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna write a review online. I did a
Good.
negative one, and then I even posted it on my Facebook page because more people from my surrounding community would see it. And I was so surprised, and I wasn't surprised how many people had the same experience at the same pediatrician's office and didn't say anything about it. And I was outspoken, and that's why I tell my wife, I'm like, listen, it's much easier to not be outspoken and not say things, but they win if we do that, and that we're letting them win, and we're letting them when their voice is and their opinions are being spread, and we're not doing the same. I'm like, we're helping them win. I'm like, it
Right.
is hard to do, but we have to. I proudly say my kids aren't vaccinated, not for the purpose of like I'm trying to rub it in anybody's face or anything like that, but
No.
I want parents out there who are listening, who are, Sam Tripoli, who's a friend of mine, been on my show a bunch of times. We talked about it before he had his kids. He's like, he asked for our opinion. It was a couple of us
Good.
on a conversation, and I'm like, I told him, like, listen, my kids aren't vaccinated at all. So I'm like, when the pediatrician scares you, I'm just letting you know, do what you want, but your kids aren't going to die because you didn't vaccinate them. Like
Right.
my kids are an example of it, and that's all I'm trying to do when I say this. I try to let people know that there are examples of parents who don't vaccinate their kids, and all those bad outcomes that they scare you about don't happen. Of course there's a chance, a risk of everything, but that's the point. Let people know there's a risk. Whatever decision you make, there's a risk that your kid could get sick from of maybe a vaccinated something that could have been treated with a vaccine, and there's also a risk of you taking that vaccine. And there's,
Absolutely.
so people need to know both sides, and they need to know people. I know people don't want to talk about it, and that's why I'm sure you had a lot of people privately come to you and talk to you about it, because they're afraid of public shaming. They're afraid of being considered a conspiracy theorist or anti-vaxxer or whatever it may be. But that's why somebody like myself, who doesn't care so much about what people think, and I will make a attempt to try to talk to them logically and be like, okay, well, you can call me this, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about the information. Let's talk about the facts. Let's talk about what you know. What do you know? What's in a vaccine? Do you know the vaccine courts exist? Do you know how the vaccine schedule has increased once they didn't have liability? Do you also know, and something that you can expand on, how when they took the thimerosal out of vaccines, there was some correlation between that and kids' health, right?
Absolutely. There was a little bit of a blip in terms of when the vaccines were phased out, and then when the uptake of the maternal flu shot really um, started to take hold, when more practitioners, more OBGYNs were recommending the flu shot that did contain almost exclusively. When they started giving the flu shot to pregnant women, 90% of the vaccines that that they gave did contain thimerosal. But there was an inflection point, and the few studies that looked at that inflection point when they did phase out thimerosal from the childhood vaccines did show a drop in autism, did show a drop in developmental delays. um, the CDC very quickly played a shell game, and all they did was move the thimerosal around. So now we see, and there are other factors. There are other factors within vaccination that are concerning in terms of neurodevelopmental disorders and autism. The aluminum content the exposure to live viruses, the other chemicals, including polysorbate 80 and formaldehyde, all come into play into this toxic soup that needs to be considered, needs to be studied, never been studied. And so now we see an increase in the rates of autism, especially as the vaccination schedule becomes even more and more bloated.
Yeah, so you talked about the vax versus unvaxxed study and paper. Can you expand on that? Because a lot of people, that's one of the things that we've all really wanted was a
Right.
actual good study just proving that your kid is healthier or less likely to have these issues or any issues if you're vaxxed compared to unvaxxed.
Certainly, I was approached by 3 practitioners, 3 pediatricians who opened up their medical records, their electronic medical records, and then embarked on exactly that. These were pediatricians who were friendly to non-vaccinating families and friendly to partially vaccinating families that took a deviation from the CDC schedule. And there were also families where the children were fully vaccinated. And so I had this cross-section of individuals. And so following them up from birth, I wanted to make sure that I was looking at children that were actually born in these practices, that we had continuous medical records from birth until they were at least 3 years of age. So I had about 2,000 patients. Out of that 2,000 patients, about 30% were unvaccinated and 70% were vaccinated. And what we found were that the vaccinated children were less likely to get ear infections. They were less likely to be diagnosed with developmental delays. They were less likely to have asthma, and they were less likely to have gastrointestinal issues. And so they were clearly, the unvaccinated children in these 4, broad categories of diagnoses were clearly more healthy. And it was a paper that was published in a journal called Sage Open Medicine. It was published in May, I think on May 27th of 2020. And the paper still stands today. It has not been retracted. But it clearly, showed that in each case, the individuals that were vaccinated were at least twice as likely to have these maladies than those individuals that never received a vaccine. And this was only vaccines up to the first year of age. Okay, we only looked at that first year of life. We wanted to look at that first year of life because that's when the majority of the vaccination schedule is injected into these infants, 21 vaccines between 0 and the first birthday. And so we focused in on that first year of life. If they didn't get a vaccine during the first year of life, they were called unvaccinated. If they did, they were called vaccinated. Just did a straight across comparison. And what we found again with these four broad diagnoses, that the vaccinated children were less healthy, that they were having more developmental delays. They were having 4 times as much asthma. They were having at least twice as many ear infections, or were twice as likely to get ear infections, I'm sorry. And then depending on the number of vaccines that they received, then they were more likely to have gastrointestinal issues. Because these were practices that were friendly to non-vaccinators, we didn't do autism because we didn't see a whole lot of autism in the practices in general. We didn't have enough autism cases that we could do valid statistics with it. But I thought it was notable that in these unvaccinated practices, and practices friendly to non-vaccinators, the rates of autism were much, much lower than what we would consider the national average, which is about 1 in 54.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, just think about it. If they're having increases of anything, then that tells you it's having some negative effect on their bodies and health. I mean, that alone should tell you that it's something we should look into and be much more cautious with. I think there's probably a lot more doctors and pediatricians out there who probably agree with us in regards to our opinions on these topics. I just don't think they'll again, it's one of those topics that people don't want to be pigeonholed or they've done a great job of just character assassination for anybody who goes against the narrative. I remember London Real did a video Zoom conference call with Dr. Buttar, and then he had like 100 doctors on. It was like 100 doctors on at the same time. and he was asking these questions, and they talked about vaccines, they talked about all, and like they all agreed, and it's like, wait, so it's not a fringe topic where the only places you're going to hear people question vaccine science is podcasts and conspiracy documentaries. There's a lot of people who agree.
Exactly, exactly. And I think there's a lot of persecution for those that come out are very public, especially in the state where I live in California, where it's very, very difficult to get even a medical exemption to vaccinations for school attendance. A lot of those doctors are afraid to come out of the woodwork. They're afraid to speak out because the level of persecution by the different state medical boards can be really, really onerous.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's why I hate when, you heard kind of the going back and forth with Robert Kennedy Jr. and Dr. Chiva, because I'm a huge fan of Robert Kennedy Jr. And obviously he doesn't need any more fame or attention. I mean, he's a Kennedy. For him to be like, to me, it means a lot when he's willing to go to battle for this movement and all this, when he didn't have to, and he was a very successful environmental attorney and all this stuff, and to see two people who should be on the same team go at it, I didn't like that at all. I thought it really hurt the movement, and it hurt us.
It was super disappointing. It was really, there's not a whole lot of people that I have more respect for than Bobby Kennedy. He has laid so much on the line for this movement and sacrificed so much of his own, personal livelihood because of his bravery. And so, it was that was super disappointing. I mean, as a movement, we need to we come together, put our differences aside. I'm anti-vaccine. I'm more vaccine hesitant, or whatever you want to call yourself. It was just a really, really unfortunate moment in a movement where, we all need to come together. There's a lot of persecution going on, so we need to be able to support each other.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing, have you been keeping up with like Dr. Ortiz and some of the fact that some people who are pro-vaccine are now seem like they're being at least pretty honest in regards to the coronavirus vaccine, and they're saying, oh, it could have some harmful effects. It could. I'm like, wait, these are the people who've been going around for years telling people that vaccines are safe and effective and there's no harm, no risk or whatever, and now it sounds like they're planting a seed of doubt, and it seems like there's some shades of doubt in their comments.
That's why this is such a salient time. You've got people like Peter Hotez and Paul Offit, these vaccinologists who have been vaccine apologists up to this point, who are now shedding doubt on, the rush to market for the coronavirus vaccines and all the different variants. So, this is a real salient time for us, and it's an opportunity to be able to get our word out, because more and more people are questioning when they're talking about adult mandates and talking about, in Virginia wanting to mandate COVID-19 vaccination even before we actually have one, then more and more people are doubting. So it does create an opportunity for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, like, if people are doubting any vaccine, even if it's not the ones that they're giving to their children, if at least the coronavirus vaccine is making them question that alone, maybe that opens the door for them to question other vaccines. And
absolutely,
so I definitely think this is a really, it's weird because in a way it's like some of the worst censorship we've ever seen, and in another way it's one of the best we've had, one of the best opportunities to get people's interest into these topics.
Absolutely. We're in a good position. I'm afraid I'm going to have to wrap it up, if that's okay.
Yeah,
I am so sorry, Ricky.
No, it's okay.
It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I have another appointment coming in just a little while. But God bless you for what you're doing and for the word that you're spreading with the ripple effect. I saw your guest list and I was like, gosh, I wish I had a bunch of time so I can listen to all of these. It's absolutely amazing.
We're all in this together. We're all, I'm a huge fan of what you're doing. I mean, obviously you've gotten a lot of press, I'm sure some very positive feedback from people like myself who are a fan of yours for coming out and being outspoken and dealing with the backlash. But I'm sure you've also had to deal with a lot of negative press, which has made your life a little more stressful. So thank you so much for everything you're doing, for doing this interview, for doing all your interviews and being outspoken and talking about your personal experience and all this stuff. And I think we need more people like you, because you do have a scientific background. You understand science. You understand, the data, and we need somebody. It helps, like you said, like the PhD. It's not the end all be all, but for the average person, they might be more likely to listen to your perspective than mine, because I barely graduated high school. But but either way, we're all in this together, and I can't thank you enough for coming on. And hopefully you're on again in the near future.
Absolutely, ask anytime, and the pleasure has been all mine. It's wonderful, and I, God bless you, God bless your business as well, and keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, I really appreciate it. Thank you. Take care. Have a nice night, and we'll talk again in the near future.
Okay, thanks, Ricky.
Take care.